Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, April 19th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about the Politico forecast for the 2022 midterm elections. Now, if you hear a background sound, that is actually my fan on my MacBook. I'm not entirely sure why the fans go crazy on these devices, but for whatever reason, whenever I'm using them, they seem to be exceptionally loud when it comes down to the fan. I don't have AppleCare anymore, so I don't think I'm going to be able to fix it, but I did get the battery replaced just a few months ago, and unfortunately, this is still the result. I do think that hopefully it does get better, but no guarantee on that, so I do apologize if you hear some type of heavy fan in the background. I did unplug my computer from being charged, so that should reduce the noise because it isn't putting as much power into the computer, but then again, I'm not an IT expert, so I'm not entirely sure. But that's besides the point. Today we're focusing on the 2022 Politico forecast. This is actually the first major network forecast that we have seen when it came down to a lot of these other forecasts that we should expect to start to see circulate. Most notably, I think FiveThirtyEight should release theirs over the next couple of months. It's a lot more difficult to predict how the midterms are going to go without all of the primaries actually said and done, but that actually pushes us out to a timeline around August, which makes it a bit difficult for us to actually wait that long, considering that the midterm elections are ever changing and we can actually get a general idea of who's going to be ahead. So the first thing that we're looking at today is the Senate forecast. I also want to explore the House forecast, and the governor forecast isn't really exciting. There's a lot more toss-up races than I would like, and it doesn't really give us a better indication of how some of these races are going to go, but there is a level of discussion that definitely deserves to be talked about there. And they also definitely do things a little bit differently than they look at the Senate and the House. Obviously, the Senate and the House are a national composition. You have balance of power. When it comes down to the governorships, you do have the National Governors Association, but they are predicting it by population and the amount of Americans represented by blue or red governors, rather than talking about the majority, which obviously right now at least is in favor of the GOP, considering that as of now they have 28 out of the total 50 state governors. So looking at our 2022 overview, keep in mind the Republican Party is up by 2.3% nationwide in the generic ballot. I would estimate, based off of just underestimation for the Republican Party in the past, that you're hovering somewhere around a Republican plus 4 to 5 point victory nationwide. The 2020 election results show that Joe Biden won the presidential election by about 41,000 votes across a number of states. Those were the states of Georgia, Wisconsin, and Arizona. Had those three states flipped, Donald Trump would have won the election and won another 4-year term. The House elections in 2020 were amongst the closest of the 21st century. In fact, I think this is actually the closest it has been since the beginning of the 21st century. 222 to 213 puts the Democratic Party about 5 seats away from actually losing control of the House. And in terms of the United States Senate, this is the previous election results from 2016. We know the Senate right now is 50-50, meaning the Republican Party only needs 1 seat. 2016 actually, the map was a little bit less favored for the Democratic Party than it is right now. So moving back to our Politico forecast, we're going to start off with the United States Senate. We're going to compare it to my electoral projection, my most recent one from April 5th, that shows the Republican Party at a 52-seat advantage over the Democratic Party at 48. What I have so far is the Democratic Party losing the states of Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, but actually picking up the state of Pennsylvania. Might be quite surprising to see. I definitely encourage you to watch the explanation for that if you're a bit confused as to why it came to that conclusion. But of course, that's something to talk about later down the line. So right now, Politico rates it as a lean Republican Senate. Now, this is coming from Steve Shepard, who is the chief Politico election reporter. Now, he has done all of these predictions and given explanations for nearly all of them. And what you will find is that he expects the Republican Party practically to sweep. He expects them to win control of the Senate, win control of the House, and win the majority of the governor's offices. And I do agree with every single one of those estimations. Now, the lean characterization on the Senate, I think, is very fitting, considering where we are right now in my Senate projection. 52 to 48 may not necessarily seem like a lean margin, maybe more likely, but 52 to 48 isn't exactly this large, deafening majority that the GOP really would want from the Democratic Party. Looking at the opportunities here, they're very limited. You know, the Republican Party could potentially pick up maybe New Hampshire, could potentially win back Pennsylvania, but beyond that, they really aren't seeing many opportunities. Colorado would be a stretch, Washington would be even more of a stretch, and the rest of the states are simply untouchable. The most the Republican Party could get in a red tsunami wave, doubled up, Mount Everest type height, you would see them win 56 to 44. So looking at our map here, it just isn't conducive to a Republican Party supermajority or anything similar to what the Democrats had after the 2008 midterm elections. just simply because the map isn't there for them. The math doesn't make sense. But looking at our map here, the Republican Party is winning this majority through two tilt categories in Georgia and Arizona, two states that I've been at odds with when moving back and forth between the Democratic Party. And I do think that a lean characterization definitely encompasses what I've been trying to say about these races. Now, they have the full spread of ratings here, and they pretty much talk about the four top targets out of the swing states: Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and New Hampshire for the Republican Party. Democrats are targeting Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and also maybe, North Carolina. They talk about the individual parts of Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, etc., looking at more individual things. For example, in Arizona, they show the Democratic Party practically has the advantage in every single determining factor. Favors D, favors D, favors D. But when it comes down to candidate quality, they don't know yet because the Republicans haven't nominated anyone. But for right now, they still rate it as a toss-up. So moving back, keep that in mind. We can look at that further down the line in another video for individual races. But for right now, we're just looking at the full spread of ratings. And we'll talk about them. So on the solid GOP side, what you have is a bunch of states that I don't think we should be surprised to see. Based off of my current projection, I wouldn't exactly refute any of these. It makes sense that Iowa is in this column. I also moved Iowa into this column. Alabama, Arkansas, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Louisiana, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and South Dakota. Wouldn't refute any of those. Moving over to the likely GOP column, you have Alaska, which I also share previously. I think I had it as likely. Now I have it as safe. I guess I would argue it's safe because I think, we're in a position now where I guess I never moved it out of the safe column. Oh, very early on. I do remember at some point it was likely, but the point is that it's going to end up with two Republicans. I guess maybe it's likely incumbent, but safe GOP. A bit iffy if you ask me. Missouri for right now, I haven't moved down simply because of the fact that there isn't a guarantee Eric Greitens wins that nomination. In fact, I think it's less likely than another nomination, but should he win it, definitely I would agree. Maybe even lean GOP. Ohio makes sense. Florida makes sense. Kentucky, Utah. Utah, it makes a little bit of sense because of Evan McMullin. Kentucky, I don't know why. I think, maybe there is some type of indication that potentially Rand Paul could be weak, considering that he underperformed Trump by about, 15 points in terms of the margin. But truly speaking, Kentucky is a red state through and through. As for the lean GOP seats, I would say North Carolina makes sense. I would also characterize it somewhere around Wisconsin and Nevada, but I do get the toss-up characterizations. I would say they are probably going to be closer than North Carolina when it comes down to the final margin. But of course, that is a discussion later down the line. Arizona, Georgia, these are two states I have in the tilt GOP column. Pennsylvania, I have it in the tilt Democratic column. Wisconsin, Nevada, I have in the Republican column. As for New Hampshire, that makes sense as lean D. Likely Dem. I don't get Vermont at all. I do agree with Washington. I don't understand Oregon fully, but again, something for me to explore personally. I wouldn't just necessarily characterize it as likely. Vermont does not make any sense at all. I really don't care that there's a retiring incumbent there. I do respect this opinion very heavily. I just do think that, it doesn't really matter to me that there is a retiring incumbent because Vermont is a blue state through and through, and I don't think that the Democratic Party cares, quite frankly, at all. Otherwise, they probably would have asked, the incumbent there to run for re-election, and also they're getting their House rep to move up, so really much isn't changing. But looking at our spread here, I don't really have any major quarrels with it at all. I think it very much makes sense, and I think it matches exactly what I've been saying. Politico, I think, is very on point with a lot of these projections. I think the solid GOP column makes sense. I would have some issues with maybe some of the likely Dem, likely GOP, but again, that's just discussion for another video and really isn't something that makes a big difference. At the end of the day, they're accurately predicting which way it's going to go, and I don't think that's going to change at all throughout this election season. The lean Dem, lean GOP toss-up column, I'm really liking. I really do agree with a lot of that. So moving back into our next projection that we're going to take a look at, we're going to look at the House. Now again, recap, Democrats have a 22 over 200 majority. Talking about a 5-seat advantage here. Nothing at all super advantageous. It actually is a decrease from where they were back in 2018. But the rating here is that the House is likely Republican. I agree with this. Even in indications and, time frames where I thought the Democratic Party might perform better than they are right now based off of national polling data, generic ballot polling data, whatever it might be, I still expected the GOP to win control of the House. From the very beginning, since the moment that we knew that the House was actually going to decrease in size for the Democratic Party relative to 2018, I knew the GOP was going to get it in 2022. It just makes sense historically. It makes sense in terms of Biden's approval rating. And even back then when I had the Democratic Party winning at sometimes, a 52-seat advantage over the GOP, I was still saying the Republican Party was going to win control of the House. I've been very consistent about that, and I 100% agree with this likely Republican characterization because I don't think it's exactly safe yet. I think based off of redistricting, the Democratic Party definitely has at least nudged the needle a little bit further to the left, but it's not enough. You're going to need a lot more than just a nudge. But let's go ahead and take a look. So they currently characterize 100 143 seats as solid Democratic, 25 as likely Democratic, and 21 as lean Democratic. So altogether right now, what we're thinking about, let me go ahead and pull out my calculator because I can't do the mental math that quickly. 1 through 43 plus 25 plus 21, you're talking about 189 seats. That's roughly around the Democratic Party's numbers from 2014, but again, they are going to win a significant portion of these toss-up seats. As for Republicans, they have 139 in the safe column, 29 in the likely column, and 16 in the lean column. That's actually 184. Now, it seems less than the Democratic Party, but keep in mind we have a few status quo maps that are about to be implemented from New Hampshire, Missouri, and Florida. Florida is expected actually not to be a status quo. Instead, is going to move over into being an overwhelming gerrymander for the GOP. Ron DeSantis put forth a map in the state of Florida that we have right here that gives the Republican Party a swing of 4 additional seats. The old maps of the Republican state Senate and the state House have put the Republicans ahead by 1. Ron DeSantis really wants to go for the gusto. I also think that this map could potentially be strucken down. If you take a look here, it violates the Voting Rights Act. We will see what happens. I think that the court here being a 7-0 Republican advantage with 3 of them being Ron DeSantis appointees really is going to sway the margin in favor of him, but I do think there is a possibility that in terms of, fair voter rights, that there is a possibility that that 5th map is struck down and they opt for the Senate map that only gives the Republican Party the advantage by 1, but it is very much a stretch, and then maybe it could be petitioned to a higher level. But then there also comes the question about the Alabama case. Does the Voting Rights Act actually protect majority-minority districts? And the Supreme Court will likely make a ruling on that sometime in the future. So when you see these House ratings, expect a couple more, to be boosted up for the GOP. They're expected to get about 20 from Florida, which means you're going to add 20 to 184, which puts you already at 204. The Democrats are probably going to get about 8 seats there. So 189 plus 8, you're talking about 197. And then you're down to just toss-up races in addition to the 6 that the GOP are going to get from Missouri, in addition to potentially 1 from the state of New Hampshire. So we will see what happens. But the House maps definitely aren't as lopsided in favor of the GOP as they were previously. Now, there's a few races that Politico decides that we should take a look at. Iowa's 3rd, California's 27th, et cetera, et cetera. I'm interested by the selection of some of these. I definitely think that there are going to be more added on later down the line. Some of these are definitely ones that we have covered in the past and looked at heavily. Nebraska's 2nd District, for instance, or Virginia's 7th District, or Maine's 2nd District, or Iowa's 3rd. These are districts I've brought up with you before the 2020 election. These are districts I brought up in the past and after, the 2020 election, considering that many of them are close. And considering redistricting has drawn them to sometimes be even closer, I am very excited to see how they go. But I definitely agree with this likely Republican characterization. I think it makes sense for where we are currently. We do need to wait on the 38 remaining seats to be drawn and characterized, but I do think what you will find is that by the end of this, even though the Democrats are slightly ahead in terms of overall lean, likely, and solid seats, you will see the Republican Party probably taking advantage of about 15 to 20 seats by the end of the congressional redistricting cycle. Moving beyond this, we have our final portion of the Politico forecast for 2022, which is the governor prediction. Now, they say that they predict that the same number of Americans will have Republican and Democratic governors, meaning you're talking about a split of America's, I think, 334 million population down to 167 million represented by Democrats, represented by Republicans as well. They talk about the Democrats' most vulnerable governorships, Kansas, which is the most one. You also have Wisconsin, Nevada, Maine, Michigan, New Mexico, and Pennsylvania. It should be interesting to see. These are all going to be competitive races. Democrats have potential pickups in Massachusetts and Maryland because Charlie Baker is out, Larry Hogan is out, no popular governor to run, right? No popular Republican, and you're not exactly seeing this more liberal Republican return to the Northeast, more so a Trump-style Republican. Donald Trump has made endorsements in both of these states. And in the final ratings, before we get into that, we're going to look at where the Politico, his name is Steve Shepard, I should remember that. He has pointed out a few races that he thinks we should keep an eye out for: Arizona, Kansas, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Florida, and Michigan. I would say we really don't need to focus much on Florida. We know Ron DeSantis is going to win, but it might be an indicator about how competitive he will be for 2024, which is exactly what it says. Arizona, Kansas, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, definitely taking a look at in the future, much more in depth. And looking at the final spread of ratings here, not really much to argue against. Looking at my own governor projections, what you're going to find is that they are also very similar. I think it's something that might be quite interesting. Wisconsin is my only lean GOP state, and I believe they characterize Wisconsin as a toss-up, which makes sense, but I do think, again, the Republican Party actually comes ahead. I'm not so sure that, I agree with some of the characterizations about Maryland, Massachusetts being not in the safe Democratic column. At the end of the day, these are one of the most Democratic states, both of them, in the entire country, and I think they definitely deserve to be a little bit more Democratic when it comes down to actual margin. Colorado, I characterize right now, I believe, actually, I moved it over into the likely Democratic column. I don't think this map is fully updated, but, really, nothing much of an argument to be made there. I don't necessarily agree that it's likely. I think it should be more safe for some of these states, for instance, New York. But again, it's the accurate predictor. I think, you're talking about the right party that's going to win it. Nothing really major. It's just a slight rating change that I would move. I agree with Connecticut. I agreed with Rhode Island. I agree with Illinois. Not much really going to be super significant. I also agree with Oregon. So maybe some minute changes. I think, looking at it right now, there definitely could be. But, for the sake of this, I'm not really going to continue going down that path. For the lean Democratic seats, I recently characterized Maine in the Democratic column. Minnesota, I did as well. Of course, I did Maryland. Of course, I did New Mexico. And Michigan, I did as well. I cited Gretchen Whitmer's polling data that Politico actually cites as well. In the toss-up column, I don't like to use just the toss-up column, so I do characterize all of these states. I'm not super confident in the Republican Party's chances at victory in Arizona. I would say they definitely have a better shot at the Senate election there, but again, discussion for another video. Georgia, I had the GOP ahead. In Kansas, I had the GOP ahead. In Nevada, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin could definitely be close, but I think they really are swinging back and forth at this point in time. And it seems as if the Republican Party has really locked down the remaining states. You're talking about previously competitive states such as Florida and the likely GOP column. Ohio, Democrats are trying to contest Texas. They're trying to contest Iowa. It really isn't going to be much. Alaska could be slightly interesting, but not really. Just ranked choice voting might actually shake up the race just ever slightly. The congressional race there is probably going to be a bit more exciting. And as for the solid GOP seats, we're not really seeing much changing. I don't really want to even, spend too much time talking about that. So I definitely agree with a lot of these ratings. I would change some things, maybe left or rightward, just a spot, nothing super significant. But at the end of the day, I really do like this Politico forecast. And I think it's pretty accurate when it comes down to the Senate and the House and also the governorships. So overall, that's pretty much what I wanted to discuss, looking through my predictions, looking through Politico's predictions and talking about what's agreeable, what's not, what makes sense, what doesn't to me, and what I think that you should take away from this. So overall, I think it becomes very evident the GOP has the advantage in both of these congressional races, the Senate, the House, and the governorships. I think that's just been pretty much established ever since Biden went into the negatives nationwide, ever since Republicans went into the positives nationwide. But it is something that, of course, does deserve its own discussion and future discussion later down the line, as these forecasts are inevitably going to change as we get closer to November. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below, subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. And again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.